Greetings, I'm Skylar, and I'm currently 16 years old. My life revolves around sharing a home with my twin sister, Skylar, my younger brother, and our grandmother in an antiquated house just down the street. The tale I'm about to recount might seem reminiscent of the spine-chilling narratives often found on television, but I assure you, it's a real account. It all commenced when my parents met a tragic end in a car accident one fateful Friday night as they were heading home. According to my grandmother, they passed away on the spot, mere moments before the paramedics could arrive. Since that grim day, which occurred approximately 2 months ago, my brother Carter, my twin sister Skylar, and I found ourselves orphaned, necessitating a move from our cherished family home to our grandmother's residence, along with the need to switch schools. Prior to the accident, I had only met my grandmother, who is my mother's mother, once when I was about 8 years old. I couldn't be certain whether my twin sister had any recollections of her. As for my father's parents, they resided on a different continent and were too frail to make the arduous journey for the funeral. Consequently, our parents were laid to rest swiftly, and without allowing us the opportunity to bid farewell to our friends, our grandmother arrived to usher us into her life. Those events remain etched in my memory as though they occurred just yesterday. Skylar and I stood side by side, gazing upon our parents' graves, when our grandmother approached and introduced herself as our newfound caretaker. She informed us of our imminent relocation to live with her. The sight of her alone was enough to intimidate my younger brother. He clutched my hand tightly upon spotting her. Her hair was adorned with an assortment of beaded braids, and I was convinced that the multitude of necklaces, bracelets, and anklets adorning her limbs weighed more than my petite brother. Carter was just a toddler, barely 3.5 years old at the time. She sported a sash cinched around her waist and adorned an intricate, albeit peculiar, tribal pattern on her forehead. It was truly hard to fathom that this was the woman now standing before us. My sister and I exchanged a single glance, both sharing the same sense of disbelief. Had it not been for the reassuring confirmation from our family friends who knew our parents intimately, as well as the presence of the police, we might never have consented to accompany her. In our eyes, she could have easily been mistaken for a deranged individual attempting to abduct us, perhaps for nefarious purposes such as slavery or sacrificial offerings. Yes, she exuded an aura of such ominous dread. The loss of our parents marked the most heart-wrenching moment in the lives of my brother, Skylar, and me. Yet, the subsequent upheaval of moving in with our grandmother, transitioning to new schools, and the absence of familiar friends proved to be almost as agonizing. Upon arriving at her abode, my initial impression was that my grandmother was undeniably immersed in some form of witchcraft. Thankfully, her house did not emanate any eerie doors. In fact, it carried a pleasant scent, but it was adorned with an abundance of tribal symbols, strewn across various corners, and even embellishing the doorstep. Her peculiar attire, her unsettling appearance, and the isolated ancient dwelling situated a tad too far from neighboring houses further fueled my suspicions. Nonetheless, it was astonishing to discover how genuinely loving and affectionate our grandmother turned out to be. Beneath her unconventional customs and her tales of the supernatural, she treated us with such care that, at times, we could temporarily set aside the pain of our parents' loss. She meticulously packed every single item from our former home, even those that posed a challenge to stow away. Skylar's extensive collection of books found its new home in our grandmother's house, and she reassured us that we could postpone starting school immediately since December and the Christmas holidays were approaching. During this time, we engaged in a multitude of activities together, including watching movies, baking cookies, and exploring various other enjoyable pursuits. Gradually, if I'm completely honest, we grew fond of her. However, there was one peculiar occurrence that puzzled us. Every morning, as my twin sister and I awoke, we could hear Grandma singing and reciting unfamiliar songs in an unintelligible language within her room before she descended to join us. Her room was situated right next to ours, making her morning ritual easily audible. One breakfast morning, I mustered the courage to inquire about the significance of her daily practice and why she engaged in it. She proceeded to divulge that it was a means for her to delve into the supernatural realm through her dreams. Whenever she experienced a dream she believed would come to fruition, she chanted to pave the way for another vision the following day. Naturally, my twin sister and I found her explanations utterly preposterous, prompting us to request proof. She accepted the challenge. On the occasion of her next dream, which followed her morning singing and incantations, she came downstairs to relay its contents. My sister found it amusing and burst into laughter, but I didn't share her sentiment. It turned out that my grandmother had dreamt that I would suffer a broken leg by day's end. I, however, remained steadfast in my conviction that such an incident would never occur. Nevertheless, to err on the side of caution, I treaded exceptionally carefully that day, avoiding any reckless actions or running, just in case. I resolved to remain indoors that day, driven by my determination to prove Grams wrong. Skylar kept a vigilant eye on me throughout the day, as she too was curious to see if Grandma's dream would materialize. As the day wore on, Skylar's watchful presence began to unnerve me. Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I finally snapped, "Stop scaring me, Skylar. Your role is to ensure I don't get hurt, not to watch me and anticipate an accident." Nightfall arrived, and my legs remained unscathed, free from slips, falls, or any mishaps. Throughout dinner, I wore a smug expression, eagerly anticipating the opportunity to prove that all the precautions had been in vain. I cleared the dinner plates, deposited them in the kitchen, and retired to my room for the night. The day was drawing to a close, and I believed I had won my argument. However, as I ascended the stairs to my room, my phone chimed with a message. When I glanced at my phone to read it, I can't quite explain what happened next. The next thing I knew, I was engulfed in excruciating pain, writhing on the floor in agony. It turned out I had indeed broken my leg, and Grandma had seemingly foreseen it all along. To this day, I remain baffled by how I slipped on that staircase. But slip I did, and it resulted in me having to wear a cast for an extended period. From that point onward, every morning, we would inquire about Grandma's dream from the previous night, and without fail, it would materialize during the course of the day. Her dreams spanned a vast array of topics, ranging from weather predictions to private matters concerning our neighbors that we were never meant to know about, each one unfolding as if scripted by fate itself. The accuracy of Grandma's dreams was consistently uncanny. Skylar and I even began to contemplate how we could monetize our newfound ability to foretell events people needed to know about but were unaware of. It was an exciting prospect, up until the day Grandma had a particularly unsettling dream. Her demeanor was visibly shaken as she descended the stairs to inform us of her vision. In turn, our own composure began to waver. She recounted seeing a mysterious, hooded figure dressed in black entering our home with harmful intentions. Given the impeccable track record of Grandma's dreams, we were all gripped by an unsettling certainty that this one would manifest as well. My instinct was to immediately contact the police, but both Skylar and Grandma vehemently opposed the idea, fearing that the authorities would dismiss our claims as implausible. Thus, we were left pondering how to protect ourselves. My previous attempt at averting one of Grandma's dreams had proven futile, which only heightened our anxiety. Leaving the house seemed risky, as the ominous figure might be lying in wait for our return. Therefore, we collectively decided that fortifying our home was the best course of action. On that fateful day, we replaced our doors with sturdier ones, added extra locks, and secured all the windows with additional locks as well. To bolster our defenses, we invested in a network of security cameras strategically placed around the house. The expenses were substantial, but we were convinced that the impending threat, foretold in Grandma's dream, warranted these precautions. As soon as we completed the installation of these protective measures, an evening deluge commenced, relentless in its intensity. We couldn't shake the feeling that this torrential rain was an ominous omen, particularly since Grandma's dream had mentioned incessant heavy rainfall. The three of us found ourselves fixated on the screens connected to the surveillance cameras, spending hours monitoring them diligently. Our primary concern was Carter's safety, ensuring he remained soundly asleep throughout the night. We were resolute in our determination not to let Carter unwittingly welcome the potential attacker into our home. Although he possessed the intelligence to open doors, he lacked the discernment to distinguish friend from foe, and we harbored a deep-seated conviction that the ominous figure was indeed on his way. We were not willing to take any chances we could avoid. After a prolonged period of waiting, exhaustion and hunger began to gnaw at us, and doubt crept in. We started to question whether the hooded man, who we were certain was approaching to harm us, would ever materialize. I even entertained the thought that Grandma might have erred, and her dream was perhaps meant for the following day. Fatigue weighed heavily on me, and I yearned for sleep. Just as we were on the brink of calling it a night, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a man's silhouette approaching our front door. Skylar erupted into screams. "He's hooded, he's hooded." I swiftly dialed 911, but to our collective surprise, the man chose to ring the doorbell instead of attempting to force his way inside. Why would someone intent on causing harm ring the doorbell? I wondered. It became evident that it was a trap. Our fortified doors held fast, and he required our unwitting cooperation to gain entry and launch his attack. However, what transpired next left me utterly flabbergasted. To my astonishment, Skylar, motivated either by sheer courage or an inexplicable lapse of judgment, approached the door and asked the person to identify themselves. Inwardly, I couldn't fathom why she sought to ascertain his identity when the logical course of action should have been to refrain from opening the door. We were well aware that he posed a threat. The subsequent revelation was equally shocking to all of us. Our neighbor, Mr. Caleb, stood behind the door hooded. We requested that he lower his hood, and indeed, it was him. I remained hesitant about letting him inside, haunted by the memory of how unlikely it seemed that I would break my leg on the very day Grandma had her ominous dream, yet it had happened nonetheless. Caution was paramount in my mind. However, my grandmother and Skylar were adamant about not leaving the man out in the cold. I persistently urged them to consider the strange circumstances, why he had chosen this day, at such a late hour in the midst of pouring rain, and why he was cloaked in a hood. My warnings, though well-intentioned, went unheeded, and they eventually decided to allow him entry. I watched his every move as he stepped inside, and we all inched back, ever so slightly, maintaining a cautious distance. He appeared unsettling, drenched from the rain, and wore a stern, forbidding expression. Enough with all this racket, he barked, clearly agitated. Then he turned his gaze to Grandma and exclaimed, "You're a rather eerie old lady. Those bizarre noises you subject me to every day send shivers down my spine." With that, he hurriedly departed. As soon as he left, we exchanged incredulous glances and erupted into laughter. Only then did we realize how bizarre our behavior must have seemed to our neighbors. Thankfully, nothing untoward occurred that day, and no one launched an attack against us. When I later inquired of Grandma why her dream had failed to materialize, she chuckled and suggested that perhaps on this occasion she hadn't genuinely entered the supernatural realm, and it had been just an ordinary dream. I couldn't help but feel relieved that this particular vision hadn't come to fruition. Although Grandma's dreams continued to come true after this incident, if this one had materialized, it would likely not have been a light-hearted story at all.